Is mental health genetic, habit, or personality? And how can you improve or master?
Yeah, well, it's all of those. You might say, well, it's unfair that it's genetic. Well, we all have different temperaments. Okay. 5-dimensional temperament, extroversion, sensitivity and threshold for positive emotion, neuroticism, that's sensitivity and threshold for negative emotion, agreeableness, that's kind of maternal compassion and empathy versus tough, more individualized. Yeah, good. Conscientiousness, that's dutifulness, industriousness and orderliness. Openness, that's creativity, interest in ideas. 5 dimensions. Okay, where you land on those dimensions is determined to a large degree by the genetic lottery. And now there's some movement on each dimension that can occur as a consequence of socialization, but it's bounded by the place you landed when the cards were dealt, by the genetic code when you were born. And you might say, well, that's unfair. It's like, well, it's not unfair exactly. There's a random and a bounded world. And it's not unfair partly because every advantage comes with a disadvantage. So if you're extroverted, you're social and you're positive, but you're impulsive and you can tilt towards, you can't stand. If you're high neuroticism, well, you suffer a lot of anxiety and pain, but you're pretty sensitive to threat and you might see danger before anyone else does, and then you die. And maybe your children don't. And if you're agreeable, well, you're compassionate, caring, but you're going to not stand up for yourself very well, and you're tempted. If you're conscientious, well, orderly and industrial, get obsessive. And if you're creative, well, then you end up with purple hair and nose rings. And I did a study at Harvard in like 1994 when piercing and tattooing started to first emerge on the cultural landscape, because we were trying to find out if a marker for psychopathology, which wasn't obvious at that point. Well, because it was a subcultural practice before that, circus people and prisoners and so forth that were tattooed, who were pierced, and then it spilled into the mainstream, and we were curious, as I was in the psychopathology personality sub-department in the Harvard Department of Psychology, a colleague of mine, Jill Hooley, and we never published this study. Many studies end up not published. The best predictor of tattoo piercing, just creativity. There's no sign of assorted psychopathology, except the psychopathology associated with creativity. And you might say, well, what's that? And it's like, well, most creative ideas are stupid and wrong. So, why shouldn't you have ideas? Well, because most of your ideas aren't any good. And how do you know that? Well, try starting a business. The probability that you're going to fail is extremely high. Most people who end up with a successful business have failed multiple times because it's very hard to figure out what the market needs this moment. It's really hard, and so you'll flail around trying to hit that target. And if you're creative, you're going to come up with a lot of ideas, but that doesn't mean they're good. And even if they are good, doesn't mean they'll work. And so most people, because most people are creative, by the way, they're not even a little bit creative. And that's because creativity is a high-risk, high-reach strategy. If you win, you can win big, but the probability that you lose is pretty damn high. Hardly anybody made money from a book. And it's really hard to write them. And like, how many books have you written? None. And how many successful books have you written? And like there's a 1 in 100 chance maybe that you've written a book. I doubt if it's that high. Like actually written and published a book. It's probably more like 1 in 1,000. And then 99.9% of books sell less than 200 copies. So you got a 1 in a million chance at best of writing a book that is going to be successful. And you might ask, well, then why bother? And the answer is, well, most people don't. That's how they solve that problem. Just don't do that. And then you won't fail. And most of you probably haven't written a symphony or even a song or a play. You probably don't. I doubt if you generated the original dance except by accident. And then generally people will just laugh about that. So we studied creativity across a wide range. People developed a 13 scale with 8 levels of competence domain, a musical front. I have no training or in this area I've written original compositions that have been played internationally by musicians. And you sum across all 13 domains, and the median score, which is the most typical score, is 0, and 70% of people score 0. And the next most common score is 1, and that's like, now you got 80. Okay, no matter where you land in the temperamental landscape, you're going to have your associated faults and temptations, and you're going to have your associated proclivity to your form of mental illness. So now, that might visit you if you're particularly unlucky, or you might fall into that if you're incautious. But generally don't get an advantage without an attendant. So that's on the genetic front. And then there's environmental variability. You can take a neurotic child. The studies have already been done. Some children by, let's say 2, although you can actually 6 months. So imagine you have a child lab, and his or her mother is there, and the mother is sitting here, and then a little wheeled robot is remote in by the experiment. Well, some kids will just run right over it, engage with the robot, and others will hide behind their mother and then leak out. And the ones who hide are higher in negative emotion. And then if it's a baby-eating robot, they're not dead, so that's their strategy. Whereas hey, your kids are going to go play with a strange dog at the playground, or not. And sometimes that's real fun, and sometimes it's no fun at all. And sometimes it's the kid who's hiding behind his mother's legs that doesn't have his face torn off by the pit bull. So there's variability for a reason, and then the more neurosis prone kids, more prone to emotion, they're going to suffer from a higher proclivity, depression, and anxiety later in their life, and that's the price they're threatening. But if you take those kids and you really encourage them to explore voluntarily, instead of facilitating their proclivity to hide themselves, you can tilt them up into the normal range, and those studies have been done. And so you're never going to take a kid who's really high in trait neuroticism and make them as low in trait neuroticism as someone, at the 99. You just can't. Maybe you could do it if you did nothing else than train that child like 12 hours a day for 10 years. But you can shift a fair bit. And if you're introverted, you can learn extroverted skill. Agreeable, you learn to stand up for yourself. If you're unconscientious, you can learn to discipline yourself, although that's if you don't have the discipline conscience. So, and then in terms of habit, well, you become what you practice. And so if you're high in neuroticism, it's going to take a lot of practice to get you all calmed down. But that's what you do in psychotherapy, people all the time, because a large number who are in therapy have higher than average levels of negative emotion. You help them become stronger, and the way you do that is by strategizing with them and encouraging them to confront the things that they're afraid of and avoiding, and they become more able and more courageous as a consequence of doing so, and you can shift people quite a lot doing that. And that's what you do when you learn, and that's how you teach kids, and it's the universal mechanism of adaptation. You try to speed that up in psychotherapy and do that for yourself. Like this is a really useful ritual. So look, you got a goal, and you'll see that as you progress towards the goal, there'll be obstacles that emerge, and some of them you don't want to confront. You're going to shy away. So maybe I have a client and they're being tyrannized at work in a job, and to do that they have to put their CV in order, and they're embarrassed about their CV, and they don't even want to open the file on their computer that contains their CV, which they haven't looked at for 10 years. It contains nothing but a record of their dismal failures in the past as far as they're concerned, and that's a box that's locked, that's Pandora's box with a dragon in it, and they don't want to go anywhere near it. And no wonder. But if they're going to get another job, well, unless they get a resume together, stuck under the thumb of their local tyrant, and that's not a good one. And so often what you do with someone like that is you say, just print your resume. Don't even look at the bloody thing. Just print it, turn it upside down, put it in an envelope, and bring it to the session the next. And then they come back and say, that task that we agreed on, because you have to agree on. I didn't do it. I couldn't even sit at. And so then you say, well, do you think this week you could just sit at the computer and think about opening your resume? And they might say yes. And then they come back the next week and said, I didn't even sit at the computer and think about my resume. So then you say, okay, we'll do it right now. Okay, close your eyes. Now, imagine your computer. Bring it to mind as vividly as right now. Imagine you're walking into your room, and now the goal is to sit at your computer. So now why don't you tell me what happened? So imagine your office. Okay, now you're walking in. Now tell me what happened. Walked away. Okay. And how are you feeling? Oh, well, your example. No, you mean terrified out of your skull.
Oh, you want me to be terrified?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
You didn't say that.
She's not very high in neuroticism, by the way. As you can tell, because she's